My name is Olivia Harper. I am 29 years old. I used to believe that the quiet life I had built with my husband was something solid, something that would hold steady even when the wind picked up outside our home. Looking back now, I can see how easily the smallest cracks can widen when no one is willing to name them out loud. If any of this sounds familiar, if you have ever sat with a feeling you could not quite explain and wondered whether you were the one imagining things, I hope you will stay with me through what I am about to share. The evening it began was ordinary in every way that mattered. I was in the office at the back of our estate, the one with the wide windows that look out toward the San Francisco peaks. The light was turning that soft gold it gets in early autumn in northern Arizona. I had just finished a client revision and was stretching my shoulders when Ethan walked in carrying a folder. He did not knock. He rarely did anymore. He set the folder on the desk between us and said, "We need to talk about the business." His voice was calm, almost gentle, the way someone speaks when they have already decided the outcome. "You have been stretched thin. The stress is showing, and it is starting to affect the household. I think it would be best if I took over the financial side for a while." I looked at the papers. They were not suggestions. They were documents ready for signatures pages that would give him power of attorney over the accounts I had built since before we married. My design work, the small studio I ran from this very room, the income that had always been mine. I asked him what had changed. He smiled in that patient way he had started using more often. He said I was overreacting, that this was simply him protecting me from decisions I might regret later. When I did not reach for the pen, the smile faded. He told me I was being difficult, that my sister Chloe had already agreed this would be helpful for everyone. The words landed heavier than I expected. Chloe had been spending more time at the estate lately, always ready with quiet agreement, whenever Ethan spoke about my stress. I told him I needed time to read everything. He left the folder and walked out without another word. The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if he had slammed it. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, the desert light sliding across the desk. The house felt larger than usual and strangely empty at the same time. I picked up the top page and read it twice. The language was careful, almost kind, on the surface. It spoke about reducing my burden, about letting the person who understood the bigger picture handle the details. It did not say what would happen if I refused. It did not need to. Later that night, I could not sleep. I went back to the office and opened the folder again. That was when I noticed the second document, the one that had been underneath the others. It was a printout of meeting notes dated 2 weeks earlier. The heading read, Discussionary EO H Support Plan. The names at the top were Ethan's and Chloe's. I read the first paragraph and felt something cold settle in my chest. They had sat down together without me and talked about my work habits, my friendships, the hours I spent alone in this room. The notes used words like emotional volatility and need for structured oversight. Chloe had contributed ideas about how to limit my access to certain accounts for her own protection. Ethan had written in the margin in his neat handwriting, "She will resist at first. That is expected." I folded the page and put it back exactly where I had found it. My hands were steady, but the quiet inside me had changed. It was no longer the quiet of a peaceful evening. It was the quiet that comes right before you decide you can no longer pretend you do not see what is in front of you. The next morning, I called my friend Mia Torres. We had known each other since college, and she was one of the few people I still spoke to without feeling I had to edit myself. I kept the conversation light at first. I asked how her new job was going and whether she had been hiking lately. She told me about a trail she had found outside Sedona. Then, almost without planning to, I asked if she had noticed anything different about me the last few times we had talked. Mia was quiet for a moment. She said I had seemed more careful with my words lately, like I was measuring everything before I let it out. She asked if everything was all right at home. I told her I was not sure yet. I did not mention the folder or the notes. I was not ready to say those things out loud to anyone, except the version of myself that was already starting to keep records. That afternoon, Derek Klein, the man who managed the property and grounds for the estate, came by to check the irrigation system near the studio. He had worked here longer than Ethan and I had lived in the house. He was quiet by nature, the kind of person who noticed small changes without commenting on them. While he worked, he mentioned that Chloe had been by the main house several times in the past month, always arriving when Ethan was home and leaving shortly after. He did not ask questions. He simply stated it as a fact and went back to adjusting a valve. I thanked him and went inside. The house felt different now that I was looking at it with new eyes. Every room seemed to hold the echo of conversations that had happened when I was not in it. I started keeping a small notebook in the bottom drawer of my desk. I wrote down dates and times. Nothing dramatic, just the pattern of who was where and when. It felt strange at first, almost disloyal. Then I remembered the margin note in Ethan's handwriting and kept writing. 2 evenings later, Ethan brought up the documents again. This time, Chloe was in the kitchen with us. She was making tea, moving around the space like she belonged there. Ethan placed the folder on the counter and said the papers really did need to be signed soon. He said it would make things simpler for everyone. Chloe nodded without looking at me. She said she thought it was a good idea that I had seemed tired lately, and this would take some pressure off. I asked Chloe when she and Ethan had met to discuss my life. She stirred her tea and said they had only been trying to help. Ethan watched me waiting. I told them both that I would not be signing anything until I had my own attorney look at it. The words came out calmer than I felt. Ethan's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted. Chloe set her mug down a little too carefully. She said she hoped I was not making this into something bigger than it needed to be. I left the kitchen without answering. Upstairs in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out at the darkening desert. The peaks were already losing their colour. I thought about the notebook in my desk drawer and the quiet way Derek had mentioned Chloe's visits. I thought about how many times in the past few months Ethan had suggested I cancel plans with friends because we needed time together. I had agreed each time, telling myself it was temporary, that marriage required compromise. That night, I did not sleep well. Every small sound from the house made me wonder who else might be awake, who else might be talking about me when they thought I could not hear. The next morning, I woke early and went to the office before anyone else was up. I opened the notebook and added the date of the kitchen conversation. Then I wrote one more line at the bottom of the page, the one I had been circling around for days without letting myself finish. I needed to know how long this had been happening and how much of it I had chosen not to see. The morning after I wrote that last line in the notebook, I woke with the same question still sitting in my chest. I knew I could not keep circling it forever without losing whatever small piece of myself was still clear. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen while my husband was still upstairs and carried it back to the office. The folder was gone from the desk. He had taken it sometime in the night. That small fact told me more than any argument could have. I spent the next 2 days moving through the house with the same careful rhythm I had always used, only now I was watching everything twice. My husband went to work at his usual time and came home at his usual time. My sister stopped by once in the afternoon, with groceries, she said, she had picked up for us. She stayed longer than usual, moving through the kitchen and asking light questions about my latest client project. I answered everything in the same even tone. I had practiced. When she left, I added the visit to the notebook with the time and what she had asked. The page was filling faster than I expected. On the third day, I called an attorney. I found James Reed through a quiet search on my phone while my husband was in the shower. His office was in downtown Flagstaff, and he agreed to see me the following afternoon without asking too many questions over the phone. I told my husband I had a meeting with a new client in town and that I would be back before dinner. He nodded without looking up from his laptop and reminded me to keep the drive safe. The words were ordinary. The way he said them felt like he already knew I was not telling the whole truth. James Reed's office was small and lined with books that looked like they had actually been read. He listened without interrupting while I explained the folder, the documents, and the meeting notes I had found. I did not use my sister's name at first. I simply said someone close to both of us had been involved in the conversation. He asked steady questions about accounts, about whether anything had been signed already, about whether I had copies of the papers. When I told him I had taken photographs of the notes before returning them to the exact place, he nodded once and said that was useful. He did not promise anything dramatic. He said we could start by requesting statements on the accounts that were still in my name only, and by documenting every request my husband made going forward. The appointment lasted 40 minutes. When I left, the desert air outside felt sharper than it had when I arrived. That evening at dinner, my husband asked how the client meeting had gone. I told him it had been productive. He set his fork down and looked at me across the table. He said he hoped I was not letting work pull me in too many directions again. The sentence was soft, almost concerned. Then he added that my sister had mentioned I seemed distracted lately, and that she was worried I was taking on too much. I met his eyes and asked when they had spoken. He said it had been earlier that day, just a quick call. He did not offer more. I did not push. I finished my meal and carried my plate to the sink, while the notebook in my desk drawer seemed to grow heavier in my mind. 2 mornings later, I kept the appointment I had made with Dr. Sophia Lang. I had found her name through a referral from Mia, who knew someone who had seen her years ago. The office was in a small building near the university. Nothing grand, just a quiet waiting room with soft chairs and a water dispenser. Dr. Lang was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of steady attention that did not rush to fill silences. I told her I was not sure why I was there yet, only that things at home had started to feel smaller than they used to. She did not ask for details right away. She asked what it felt like when I noticed the change. I said it felt like walking into rooms I had lived in for years, and realizing someone had moved the furniture while I was asleep. She nodded and said, "We could start there." I left the session with a time for the next week and a strange mixture of relief and fear. No one at the estate knew where I had been. On the drive back, I stopped at a trailhead outside town and sat in the car with the windows down. The air smelled like pine and dry earth. I thought about the notebook and the photographs on my phone and the careful way James Reed had written down dates. I thought about how many times in the last year I had cancelled plans with friends because my husband had said we needed the evening to ourselves. Each cancellation had felt like a small, reasonable choice at the time. Sitting in the car with the peaks in the distance, they no longer felt reasonable. That night, my sister called. It was late after my husband had gone upstairs. Her name lit up on my screen, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered and walked out onto the back patio where the night was clear and cold. She asked how I was doing, in a voice that tried to sound casual. I told her I was fine. She was quiet for a moment and then said she had been thinking about our conversation in the kitchen the other night. She said she hoped I knew she and Ethan were only trying to make things easier. I asked her what she thought needed to be made easier. She said my workload, the decisions that seemed to weigh on me lately. I asked her if she and my husband had discussed anything else about me that I should know. Her answer came too quickly. She said of course not, that they had only talked about how much they both cared. I stood on the patio after the call ended and watched the lights from the main house windows. One of them went dark. I wondered which room my husband was in and whether he was waiting to hear how the conversation had gone. I went back inside and added the call to the notebook with the exact time and what she had said. Then I wrote one more line underneath it. I needed to know what else had been said when I was not in the room and who else had been part of those conversations. The following week, I met with James Reed again. He had looked at the account statements I had requested and found small transfers that had been authorized under my name, but that I did not remember approving. The amounts were not large on their own, but they added up over months. He asked if I had ever given anyone else access or signed anything that might have allowed electronic approvals. I told him I had not. He said we should consider freezing certain accounts and changing passwords while we gathered more information. He also asked whether I had anyone else I trusted who might have noticed changes in my life over the past year. I thought of Mia and of Derek Klein, the property manager, who had mentioned my sister's visits without being asked. I told him I would speak with both of them. That evening, I called Mia first. She answered on the second ring and asked if everything was all right. I told her I was trying to understand some things and that I might need to ask her uncomfortable questions. She said she would rather answer uncomfortable questions than watch me stay quiet. I asked if she had ever felt I was pulling away from our friendship in the last year. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said yes, that I had cancelled more plans than I had kept, and that when we did talk, I sounded like I was choosing every word carefully. She asked if my husband had anything to do with it. I did not answer directly. I thanked her for being honest and told her I would call again soon. The next morning, I found Derek Klein, near the studio, replacing a section of drip line. I asked him how long he had been managing the property. He said almost 6 years. I asked if he had ever seen anything unusual about the way people came and went from the main house. He stopped working and looked at me for a moment. Then he said my sister had started coming by more often in the last 8 or 9 months. Usually, when my husband was home and I was out. He said he had assumed it was family business and had not thought much of it until recently. I asked what had changed recently. He said he had seen her leave with a folder once that looked like the kind my husband carried. He had not mentioned it before because it was not his place. I thanked him and told him I appreciated him telling me now. That afternoon, my husband came home earlier than usual. He found me in the office and asked why I had been out so much lately. I said I had been meeting with clients and running errands. He sat on the edge of the desk and said he had noticed I seemed more distant. He said it worried him. Then he asked if I had spoken with anyone about the documents he had shown me. I looked at him and asked why he thought I would need to speak with anyone. He smiled the patient smile again and said he just wanted to make sure I was not making things harder than they needed to be. I told him I was still thinking about everything. He nodded and left the room without pushing further. I sat at the desk after he was gone and opened the notebook again. The pages now held dates, times, conversations, and small observations that had once seemed ordinary. I turned to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Underneath it, I wrote the question that had been growing louder every day. I needed to decide how much longer I was willing to live inside a story that other people were writing without me. The morning after I wrote that question in the notebook, I woke before the sun touched the peaks. I made coffee and carried it to the office, but I did not open the notebook right away. Instead, I sat with the quiet and let the decision settle. I was not going to keep living inside a story someone else was writing for me. I called James Reed first. He listened while I told him what I had decided. I wanted the accounts that were still in my name frozen and new passwords set on everything I controlled. I wanted a formal letter sent to my husband stating that I would not sign any documents without independent legal advice. James asked if I was prepared for the conversation that would follow. I said I was not prepared for it to be easy, but I was prepared for it to happen. He said he would draft the letter that afternoon and email it to me for approval. I spent the rest of the morning packing a small bag with clothes, my laptop, the notebook, and the folder of photographs I had taken. I did not take anything that belonged to both of us. I left the wedding photographs on the dresser and the books we had bought together on the shelves. When the bag was zipped, I called Mia Torres. She answered on the first ring. I told her I needed a place to stay for a few nights while I sorted some things out. She said her guest room was mine for as long as I needed it, and that she would not ask questions until I wanted to answer them. I drove away from the estate while my husband was still at work. Derek Klein was near the gate when I passed. He raised one hand in a small wave, but did not stop me. I nodded back and kept driving. The road into Flagstaff felt longer than it ever had before. That evening, after I had settled my bag in Mia's guest room, I called my husband. I told him I had consulted an attorney and that I would not be signing anything. I told him the accounts in my name were being secured and that any further communication about finances should go through James Reed. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he asked if I was serious. I said I was. He asked if my sister knew. I told him she would hear from me when I was ready. He said I was making a mistake that I would regret. His voice stayed calm, almost reasonable. He said my sister had only ever wanted to help, and that I was punishing the people who cared about me most. I told him I was choosing to believe my own eyes instead. Then I ended the call. The letter from James Reed arrived in my email the next morning. I read it twice, approved it, and asked him to send it. That same afternoon, my husband called again. This time his voice was sharper. He said I was being dramatic and that I was dragging other people into something that should have stayed between us. He mentioned that my sister was upset and confused, I asked him why my sister's feelings were part of a conversation about my own accounts. He did not answer directly. He said I should come home so we could talk like adults. I told him I would not be coming home that night or any night soon. Then I hung up. My sister called 2 hours later. I let it ring once before I answered. She sounded breathless, like she had been crying or running. She asked what I was doing. I told her I was protecting what was mine. She said I was tearing the family apart over nothing. I asked her what she and my husband had discussed in the meetings I had not been invited to. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said they had only been trying to keep me from making decisions I would regret when I was less stressed. I asked her how long they had been having those conversations. She said it did not matter. I told her it mattered to me. She started to cry. She said she never meant for it to go this far and that she had only wanted to be helpful. I asked her if she had ever considered asking me what I needed instead of deciding for me. She did not answer. I told her I loved her, but that I could not keep pretending the three of us were on the same side. Then I ended the call. That was the last time I spoke to my sister. She did not call again. When I tried her number a week later, it went straight to voicemail. A text from her appeared 2 days after that. It said only that she needed space and hoped I would understand. I did understand. The space she needed was the same space I had finally taken for myself. I stayed with Mia for 10 days. During that time, James Reed helped me move the remaining accounts into my name alone and set up a separate mailing address. I found a small furnished apartment on the east side of Flagstaff with a single window that looked out toward the desert. It was smaller than any room in the estate, but every corner of it belonged to me. I signed the lease on a Tuesday morning and moved my bag and laptop in that afternoon. Dr. Sophia Lang and I continued meeting every week. In those sessions, I began to name the pattern I had lived inside without calling it by its name. I talked about the way my husband's concern had slowly become control, and how my sister's agreement had made the control feel normal. Dr. Lang did not tell me what to do. She asked what it cost me every time I had agreed to something I did not want. I started keeping a different notebook, one that listed the things I was choosing now instead of the things I was losing. 3 weeks after I left the estate, I received one final call from my husband. It came on a Sunday evening while I was sitting at the small table in my new apartment. He said he had been served with separation papers and wanted to know if we could talk before anything went further. I told him everything I needed to say had already been said through my attorney. He asked if I was really willing to throw away 4 years over a misunderstanding. I told him it had not been a misunderstanding. It had been a choice he and my sister had made together repeatedly while I was in the next room. He was quiet. Then he said my sister had stopped speaking to him too. I did not feel triumph. I felt the weight of 3 people who had once been a family and were now 3 separate silences. I wished him well and ended the call. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. My design work picked up again once I stopped editing my schedule around someone else's comfort. I took on projects I had once declined because they felt too ambitious. Mia came over on weekends, and we hiked trails I had not had time for in years. Derek Klein sent a short message through James Reed's office, saying the irrigation system at the studio had been winterized, and that he hoped I was well. I sent back a simple thank you, and did not ask for news from the estate. I still think about the folder on the desk, and the meeting notes I found underneath it. I think about the patient way my husband explained why I should give up control, and the quick way my sister agreed. I think about the last call with my sister and the way her voice broke when she realized I was no longer willing to be the person they had decided I was. Some nights, the silence in my small apartment feels like loss. Other nights, it feels like room to breathe. I have not spoken to my sister since that final call. I have not returned to the estate. The marriage is ending through the slow, necessary channels of paperwork and signatures. I do not know what my husband will choose to do with the life he tried to manage for both of us. I only know what I chose. I chose to believe the evidence in front of me, instead of the explanations I was given. I chose to let the people who had been writing my story without me finish it on their own. I chose to build something smaller and entirely mine, rather than stay inside something large and shared that required me to disappear piece by piece. The lesson I carry now is simple and difficult at the same time. Boundaries do not keep love out. They keep out the slow erosion of self that happens when love is replaced by management. Trust is not a blanket that covers every year of a relationship. It is something that must be earned again every time someone asks you to doubt what you can see with your own eyes. I earned my own trust back the day I drove away from the estate, with a single bag and a notebook full of dates. I am still learning how to spend it wisely. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever found yourself questioning the version of your life that other people were writing for you, I hope you know you are allowed to pick up the pen yourself. What would you have done if you had found those meeting notes on your own desk? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone.